You're standing on a high, cold ridge in the Pamir Mountains about 2,500 years ago. Stones mark out a grave. Around it, mourners lean over shallow wooden bowls filled with glowing embers. Someone sprinkles dry, crumbled plant on top. Thick, sweet smoke rises. It's not incense. As the wind pushes it towards you, your chest tightens, your head feels light, and the funeral shifts into something stranger. Was this on purpose? In 2019, a team analyzing charred residue in those very bowls at Eurasian Cemetery found clear chemical traces of cannabis with unusually high THC. In other words, this smoke was meant to be felt.
That smoky mountainside funeral doesn't come out of nowhere. Plants don't just volunteer to change your brain. So we have to rewind way back, long before anyone is lighting bowls at a grave. Picture northern China and parts of what's now western China and Mongolia around 12,000 years ago. The Ice Age is ending. Small groups of hunter-gatherers are testing a weird new lifestyle. Staying in one place, planting things, storing food. You walk along a riverbank and see tall stems with sawtoothed leaves. The seeds are oily. The stalks are fibrous. You pull a handful. You're not looking for a buzz. You're looking for calories and cloth. A massive genetic study published in 2021 took hundreds of cannabis genomes from around the world and asked a question: where did all this start? The DNA pointed back to early farmers in East Asia, not the Middle East, not Europe, a single domestication origin, roughly 12,000 years ago. That anchors cannabis firmly in the first wave of plants humans reshaped. At first, cannabis is just another useful plant. You can twist the fibers into cord or spin them into thread. The seeds can be ground into food or pressed for oil. If you're trying to build a stable life out of wild land, that's huge. Most people assume the story goes the other way, that humans found cannabis because they wanted to get high, and only later realized it also makes great rope. The genetics flipped that story. Intoxication was the side quest, not the main mission. When scientists compared the genomes, they saw that modern forms fall into a few big clusters. One is low THC hemp grown for fiber and seed. Another carries tweaks in genes that boost resin and cannabinoids, including THC, the stuff that alters your mind. Methodologically and explainingly, by looking at how different these clusters are and using mutation rates as a kind of molecular clock, they estimated when they split, around 4,000 years ago. That timing lines up with a broader Bronze Age shift toward more specialized crops. So for something like 8,000 years, people were mostly breeding cannabis to be tough, tall, and useful, not mind-bending. Then, sometime in the Bronze Age, a new priority shows up. Plants that don't just feed you or clothe you, but change how you feel. So, when we walk back into that high-altitude cemetery later in the story, we're not seeing a random accident. We're seeing the endpoint of thousands of years of quiet gardening choices.
Once humans discover that some versions of this plant can twist rope and other versions can twist your perception, the story of cannabis stops being just about agriculture. It becomes a story about what people are willing to cultivate inside their own heads. So once people discover that some plants don't just feed you, they bend your perception, the obvious question is, who really leans into that? Cut to a windswept grassland north of the Black Sea, about 2,400 years ago. You duck into a low felt tent with a group of riders. In the center, a shallow metal bowl sits over glowing stones. Someone tosses in a handful of dried plant and seeds. The air thickens. People shout, laugh, sway. It feels less like a quiet prayer, more like a portable nightclub. We don't have to imagine this scene from scratch. A traveler from the Greek city of Halicarnassus writes it down. His name is Herodotus. In the 5th century before the Common Era, he describes nomadic horse archers he calls Scythians. After funerals, he says, they crawl into small tents, throw cannabis onto red-hot stones, and in his words, shout for joy. Here's the thing. For a long time, historians weren't sure what to do with that passage. Was he exaggerating, misunderstanding, just spinning a good story for his readers back home? evidence shows up in a very different place. High in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia in the 1940s, archaeologist Sergei Rudenko cuts into a frozen burial mound at a place called Pamirs. Inside, permafrost has kept everything almost eerily fresh: saddles, carpets, tattooed bodies. Near one grave, his team finds a wooden frame, a small stone or metal bowl, and a leather bag filled with cannabis seeds, not ground into food, sitting right beside the brazier. Now, Herodotus's strange sauna scene isn't just a story, it's a setup we can literally see in the ground. Portable tents, braziers, cannabis, joyful shouting. Push the map a little east, and that smoky cemetery in the high mountains suddenly looks less like a one-off and more like part of a wider steppe tradition.
Those smoky tents and mountain graves feel like beginnings, like the moment humans discover getting high on purpose. Here's the twist: there aren't. They're just the first times we can prove it in a lab. Archaeology is biased toward stuff that survives fire, dirt, and 2,000 years of weather. Stones, charred residue. It's terrible at catching things that happen inside someone's head. Imagine you're at a night ceremony somewhere in Central Asia, long before any written history. A healer feeds glowing coals with resinous twigs. Someone drums. You breathe smoke. Your pulse climbs. The world feels thinner. Was that medicine? Religion? Recreation? To you, it's one event. To us, 3,000 years later, it's almost invisible. That's the real problem. The first reliable traces of cannabis smoke show up in special contexts: burials, enclosed spaces, fancy equipment, places where people put effort into doing things the right way. These are exactly the contexts that leave durable remains, but the habits that led there probably started in messier spaces: fields, camps, sickbeds. Humans bump into psychoactive plants along a few paths. The first is accident. You burn whatever fuel you have and notice one shrub makes people giggly or calm instead of just warm. The second is medicine. Someone rubs resin on a wound or brews a bitter tea for a cough, then realizes it also softens fear. The third is ritual. You already have songs, drums, dances meant to open a door in your mind. Anything that helps push that door feels powerful. And here's the irony: if that early use is woven into everyday healing or small ceremonies, it leaves almost nothing we can see. A clay cup rinsed in a river, a bundle of plants that rot away, a fire pit that looks like any other. Only when groups start saying, "This is special, this is for the dead, this is for the big right," do they build the setups we later dig up and test. So those dramatic finds aren't the first highs. They're the first highs with enough gear and symbolism attached that they fossilize. Seen that way, the story of people getting high stops being about party culture and starts looking older. Humans trying to manage hard moments, fear, the sense that someone is gone but also somehow here. When you picture those smoky graves or hotbox tents, don't imagine people discovering a new toy. Imagine them reaching for a tool they already knew, turning it all the way up.
So if smoke can help you face grief, what happens when it becomes part of your religion? Jump to northern India, maybe 3,000 years ago. A priest chants near a fire. Beside him sits a simple clay pot with crushed green leaves and water or milk. This isn't a party drink, it's an offering. One of the oldest Sanskrit collections, the Atharva Veda, put together sometime between about 1,500 and 1,000 before the Common Era, actually names cannabis as one of a handful of holy plants. In those verses, it isn't framed as a vice, it's protection, medicine, a way to loosen fear and invite a god closer. Later, in many parts of the subcontinent, a milky drink called bhang shows up in festivals honoring Shiva. You don't swallow it to escape the world. You swallow it to step into a story where humans and deities share the same altered state. So we're back on that cold ridge again. Mourners, a wooden bowl of glowing coals, and that thick, sweet smoke curling into the air.
It looks like a quiet goodbye. It's also a deliberate choice to feel different together for a moment. That's the pattern. Steppe riders sweating intense, priests sipping a bitter drink, healers easing pain with plants that blur the edges of the world. Humans keep finding ways to tilt their own minds when life gets too sharp or too strange. So what do you think? Is changing your consciousness just another human tool like fire, or does it feel like something else entirely?